The first dump truck backed onto Elijah Brooks' property at exactly 8:12 on a Tuesday morning. Its reverse alarm echoed across the quiet industrial street. Beep, beep, beep. Elijah wiped the grease from his hands and stepped out of his small workshop, expecting a delivery from a local contractor. Instead, he watched the truck bed rise until dozens of broken traffic lights crashed onto the gravel with a deafening roar. Steel poles slammed together. Red lenses shattered. Wires spilled across the ground like tangled vines. Before Elijah could say a word, a second truck rolled through the gate. Then a third. His 12-year-old daughter, Maya, hurried outside. "Dad." She stared at the growing mountain of twisted metal. "I don't think this belongs to us." Elijah frowned. "I don't think so either." A man wearing a bright orange city safety vest jumped down from the first truck. He unfolded a clipboard without even looking at Elijah. "You Elijah Brooks?" "I am." The man held out a stack of papers. "Sign here." Elijah didn't touch them. "What exactly am I signing?" "Receipt for municipal surplus disposal." "I didn't agree to receive any surplus." "You don't have to." The worker shrugged. "City order." Another truck emptied its load. The sound shook the windows of Elijah's workshop. Within minutes, nearly 100 broken traffic lights covered half his yard. "What city order?" Elijah asked calmly. The worker pointed toward a black SUV parked outside the gate. Standing beside it was Councilman Richard Kane. Expensive suit, polished shoes, perfect smile. The kind of man who looked more comfortable cutting ribbons than solving problems. Kane walked through the gate with cameras already following him. "Mr. Brooks." He extended a hand. Elijah looked at it for a second before shaking it. "What is this?" Kane smiled as if discussing the weather. "The city recently cleared Warehouse, District 9. I can see that. Unfortunately, temporary storage space is limited." "So you brought it here?" "According to our records, this property qualifies under municipal overflow regulations." Elijah looked around his tiny repair yard. "This is a family business." "It certainly is. I repair electrical equipment." "Exactly. So, why dump 400 broken traffic lights here?" Kane's smile never moved. "You'll figure something out." Several reporters laughed quietly. One camera zoomed closer. Another truck dumped its load. Metal crashed against metal. Dust filled the air. Maya covered her ears. "Dad, this isn't right." "I know." One reporter raised his microphone. "Mr. Brooks, how does it feel becoming the city's official junk collector?" A few people laughed. Elijah didn't answer. He simply watched another traffic signal bounce across the gravel until it struck the old oak workbench his late father had built decades earlier. For the first time, his jaw tightened. Not because of the traffic lights, because of the bench. His father had spent 30 years teaching him one lesson. Respect your tools, and they'll respect your work. That bench wasn't expensive. It wasn't beautiful, but it was the last thing his father had ever built with his own hands. Now one leg had snapped clean off. Maya noticed. She gently touched Elijah's sleeve. "I can fix it." He nodded. "I know you can." Across the yard, Councilman Kane turned toward the cameras. "We're proud to support local small businesses whenever possible." The reporters nodded as if it actually made sense. Elijah looked directly at Kane. "You planned this." Kane smiled. "I plan to solve a city problem. You created one." "That depends on who's looking." Before Elijah could answer, Kane climbed back into the SUV. As it drove away, someone shouted from across the street, "Hey Elijah." He looked up. One of the city workers grinned. "Don't forget recycling day." The crew burst into laughter. By lunchtime, videos had already spread across social media. Black electrician becomes city's new scrapyard. When life gives you trash. Free junk delivery. Thousands of laughing emojis filled the comments. Inside the workshop, Maya quietly closed her tablet. "You don't have to read them," Elijah said. "I'm not." She lied. "They're just mean." Elijah poured 2 glasses of iced tea and handed one to her. People usually laugh when they don't understand something. "What don't they understand?" He looked out the window at the mountain of broken signals. I don't know yet. She frowned. So, why aren't you angry? He smiled faintly. I am. You don't look angry. My father used to say anger is expensive. What does that mean? It usually costs more than the thing you're angry about. Maya thought about that. Outside, the afternoon sun reflected off hundreds of cracked red and green lenses. And, at that exact moment, someone across town realized Elijah had opened the first signal. And suddenly, getting rid of those traffic lights no longer seemed like such a good idea. The entire yard looked hopeless. Around 3 o'clock, an old pickup truck pulled into the driveway. Behind the wheel sat Walter Lewis, 73 years old, retired electrical engineer, neighbor, mentor, friend. Walter stepped out slowly, staring at the enormous pile. Well, he scratched his gray beard. I've seen worse. Maya laughed. No, you haven't. Walter smiled. Fair point. He walked around one of the traffic lights before crouching beside it. His fingers brushed across the damaged housing. Then he looked toward Elijah. You opened any yet? No. Why not? I've been cleaning. Walter tapped the side of the signal. You know what everyone else sees? Garbage. You know what I see? What? A question. Elijah crossed his arms. What kind of question? Walter smiled. Why would the city throw away equipment this expensive? The yard suddenly felt quieter. Maya looked from one man to the other. They're broken. Walter nodded. Maybe. He picked up a screwdriver lying nearby and handed it to Elijah. Let's find out. Elijah carried the first traffic signal onto the workbench. The same bench with the broken leg. Maya studied it while Walter held a flashlight. Elijah reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out an old yellow voltage tester. Its plastic handle was scratched. The numbers had almost faded away. Maya smiled. Grandpa's tester. He nodded. It still works. Walter chuckled. Just like the man who owned it. Elijah removed the first 4 screws. The metal cover lifted slowly. Dust drifted into the afternoon sunlight. All 3 leaned closer. Nobody spoke. Then Elijah stopped moving. Walter noticed immediately. What is it? Elijah didn't answer. He simply reached deeper inside the traffic signal and carefully pulled out a small electronic control board. It looked almost new. Not burned. Not cracked. Not corroded. Walter's eyes widened. That, he whispered, shouldn't be in there. Elijah turned the board over in his hands. A tiny green indicator light blinked once. Then again. The traffic light wasn't dead. Not even close. The tiny green light blinked again. Then it went dark. No one in the workshop spoke. Walter slowly took off his glasses and leaned closer. Give it to me. Elijah handed him the control board. Walter turned it over carefully, studying every connector and solder joint. Finally, he looked up. This isn't junk. Maya frowned. Then why throw it away? Walter exhaled. That's the question that should scare somebody. Elijah placed the traffic signal housing on the bench and reached for his father's old voltage tester. The scratched yellow handle fit perfectly in his hand, just as it always had. He touched the probes to the board. A faint beep. Power. There shouldn't be any charge left, Walter whispered. There isn't much, Elijah replied, but enough to wake it up. Maya stepped closer. So, it still works? Elijah didn't answer immediately. Instead, he removed another panel from inside the traffic light. The wiring looked almost untouched. Only one small relay had burned out. He smiled for the first time all day. $5 part. Walter looked at him. What? This entire traffic light was thrown away because of a relay worth less than $5. Maya blinked. You're kidding. I wish I was. For several seconds, the 3 of them simply stared at the pile outside. Hundreds of traffic lights. Maybe more. Each one suddenly looked less like garbage and more like opportunity. The next morning, Elijah unlocked his workshop before sunrise. Coffee in one hand, notebook in the other. He wrote one sentence across the top of the page. Don't assume. Test everything. It was another lesson from his father. By 7 o'clock, he had opened 6 traffic lights. For needed nothing more than inexpensive relays. One required a power module. Only one was truly beyond repair. Walter whistled. If this pattern holds, Elijah finished the sentence. Almost all of them can be saved. Maya's eyes grew wide. That's hundreds. Walter smiled. And millions of dollars. Elijah shook his head. I don't care about the money. Walter laughed softly. I know. Then why mention it? Because somebody else does. Across town, inside City Hall, Councilman Richard Kane wasn't smiling anymore. His assistant hurried into the office, holding a tablet. Sir. Kane barely looked up. What is it? You need to see this. On the screen was a short video. Elijah's workshop. A repaired traffic light. The red light. Then yellow. Then green. Perfectly synchronized. The video ended after 12 seconds. Kane's face hardened. Who posted this? A neighborhood teenager. How many views? Almost 80,000. Kane stood so quickly that his chair rolled backward. Get Public Works on the phone. Within minutes, 3 department heads sat around his conference table. One of them spoke first. We assumed Brooks would scrap everything. He isn't. So, what do we do? Kane looked around the room. No more assumptions. Another official cleared his throat. If those traffic lights still work. Kane interrupted. They don't. But they don't. Silence filled the room. Everyone understood. This wasn't a discussion. It was an order. Back at the workshop, neighbors began stopping by. Some brought coffee. Others offered spare tools. A retired welder named Hank repaired broken mounting brackets. An Army veteran cleaned rusted poles. Even teenagers who normally spent afternoons glued to their phones showed up. Maya handed one of them a screwdriver. Take off these covers. The boy looked surprised. You trust me? She smiled. My dad says trust is how people become responsible. The boy nodded. No one had ever said something like that to him before. By the end of the week, the yard looked different. Instead of chaos, there were organized rows. Reparable. Parts only. Scrap. Ready to test. The mountain of junk had become a system. One afternoon, Walter stepped back and looked around. You know what this reminds me of? What? A classroom. Elijah laughed. I didn't know classrooms were this dirty. They're supposed to be. Then something unexpected happened. A city bus driver pulled into the yard. My intersection's been flashing red for 3 days, he said. They keep saying replacement parts are backordered. He looked at the repaired traffic light. Would that fix it? Elijah hesitated. I don't know if the city would allow it. The driver shrugged. I didn't ask the city. He lowered his voice. I asked you. That night, Elijah couldn't sleep. He walked through the rows of repaired traffic lights under the glow of the yard lamps. Each one represented wasted money, wasted work, wasted opportunity. He rested his hand on his father's voltage tester. What would you do? Of course, there was no answer. Only silence. But sometimes silence carried memories. His father's voice echoed in his mind. Son, never fix something just because it's broken. Fix it because people depend on it. Elijah looked toward the city skyline. Traffic. Hospitals. Schools. Emergency vehicles. People depended on those lights every day. This wasn't about scrap anymore. It was about safety. The following Monday, 2 black SUVs rolled into the yard. Men in suits stepped out. Not reporters. Inspectors. One flashed a badge. Mr. Brooks. Yes. We've received complaints. What kind? Unauthorized electrical reconstruction. Walter folded his arms. Complaints from who? The inspector ignored him. We'll need access to everything. Maya whispered. Dad. Elijah nodded calmly. It's okay. The inspectors spent nearly 2 hours photographing equipment, checking permits, and measuring storage distances. Finally, one of them approached Elijah. Everything appears compliant. The second inspector frowned. We didn't find a single violation. The first one quietly replied, I know. As the SUVs drove away, Walter watched them disappear down the road. They weren't looking for problems. Elijah already knew. They were hoping to create one. That evening, Maya refreshed her phone. Dad. He looked up from the workbench. You're famous. I hope not. No. She smiled. You're viral. Someone had uploaded a new video. Not of people laughing. Of neighborhood volunteers working together. Kids cleaning lenses. Veterans repairing poles. Neighbors sharing food. The caption read, "One man turned the city's garbage into our neighborhood's greatest project." The comments were completely different now. Respect. This is leadership. Someone give this man a contract. Why wasn't this equipment repaired in the first place? Elijah closed the phone. Praise made him just as uncomfortable as insults. Walter noticed. You still don't like attention. I like results. Walter chuckled. Good. Then his smile disappeared. Because attention usually brings trouble. Before Elijah could ask what he meant, a white envelope slid under the workshop door. No stamp. No return address. Only his name written across the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper. 3 typed words. Stop repairing them. Nothing else. No signature. No explanation. Maya looked at her father. Walter slowly folded the note. Outside, a black SUV sat across the street with its headlights off, watching. Then, just as quietly as it had arrived, it drove away. Elijah looked back at the hundreds of traffic lights surrounding him. For the first time, he realized this had never been about garbage. Someone was afraid of what he might discover next, and he had no idea how dangerous that discovery was about to become. Elijah read the note one more time. Stop repairing them. 3 words. No signature. No explanation. He folded the paper and slipped it into his shirt pocket. Walter watched him carefully. Well, Elijah looked toward the rows of restored traffic lights. They're scared. Walter nodded. That's exactly what worries me. Maya crossed her arms. So, what do we do? Elijah picked up his father's old voltage tester. We finish what we started. The next morning, the workshop buzzed with activity. Volunteers sorted wiring. Teenagers cleaned signal lenses. Retired electricians tested control boards. For the first time in years, the empty industrial lot felt alive. Then Elijah opened the 37th traffic light. He immediately noticed something different. The controller wasn't the same as the others. It had an encrypted communication module. Walter leaned closer. I've only seen those once. Where? State Transportation Conference. They're expensive? Walter laughed softly. Expensive doesn't begin to describe them. He pointed at the board. That module allows traffic lights to communicate with one another. Maya frowned. Why would traffic lights need to talk? So ambulances can change lights before they arrive. So emergency vehicles don't get stuck. So accidents decrease. Walter looked directly at Elijah. This isn't old equipment. It's a smart traffic network. Elijah slowly looked across the yard. Hundreds of signals. Hundreds of communication modules. Millions of dollars. And someone had dumped them like trash. Across town, Councilman Richard Kane slammed his office door. His assistant stood frozen. The mayor wants answers. About what? The storm preparation report. Kane's jaw tightened. Meteorologists had issued warnings all week. Heavy winds. Flooding. Power failures. The city believed its backup traffic system was ready. Only Kane knew the truth. The replacement contractor hadn't finished installing it. If the storm knocked out the existing network, the city would have no backup. And the only working replacement sat inside Elijah Brooks' repair yard. That afternoon, Kane drove to the workshop himself. No cameras. No reporters. Just a black SUV. Elijah stepped outside. Kane smiled politely. I believe we got off on the wrong foot. Elijah didn't respond. Kane glanced around the yard. I'll make this simple. He pulled a contract from his briefcase. The city will buy everything back. Everything. Every traffic light. For the same price you dumped them here? Kane ignored the question. Name your number. Walter quietly watched from the doorway. Maya stood beside him. Elijah looked at the contract, then folded it without reading. I'm not selling. Kane blinked. You haven't heard the offer. I heard enough. You could become a wealthy man. I'm already rich. Cain laughed. You call this rich? Elijah looked around the yard. I see neighbors helping neighbors. I see teenagers learning a trade. I see people who finally believe they matter. He looked back at Cain. Money can't buy that. For the first time, Cain's confidence cracked. You'll regret this. Elijah calmly handed the contract back. No. You will. 3 nights later, the storm arrived. Rain hammered rooftops. Wind snapped tree limbs. Transformers exploded across the city. Then, one by one, traffic lights went dark. Intersections filled with confusion. Emergency vehicles sat trapped behind endless lines of cars. Police officers rushed into the streets trying to direct traffic by flashlight. The mayor stared at a wall of security monitors inside the Emergency Operations Center. Half the city had stopped moving. Where's the replacement system? She demanded. Silence. Every department head looked toward Richard Cain. He swallowed. It's delayed. The mayor turned slowly. Delayed? Before Cain could answer, the police chief walked into the room. We got another problem. What now? He placed a tablet on the table. A live video filled the screen. Elijah's workshop. Every restored traffic light was operating perfectly. Generators powered row after row of synchronized signals. The police chief looked at the mayor. He has exactly what we need. An hour later, city officials stood outside Elijah's gate. This time, no one left. The mayor stepped forward. Mr. Brooks, we need your help. Elijah remained silent. She looked genuinely exhausted. People could die tonight. He nodded. I know. Walter whispered. You don't owe them anything. Elijah looked toward the ambulances racing through the rain. Then at Maya. She simply nodded. He opened the gate. Let's get to work. All night long, volunteers loaded restored traffic lights onto trucks. Police escorts cleared roads. Electricians worked beside firefighters. Teenagers who had learned in Elijah's yard installed equipment alongside licensed crews. By sunrise, the city's busiest intersections were operating again. Traffic began flowing. Ambulances reached hospitals. School buses resumed their routes. For thousands of people, it felt like a miracle. 3 weeks later, the city council held a public hearing. The chamber was packed. Residents, reporters, business owners, volunteers. The mayor addressed the room. Our investigation found that hundreds of reparable smart traffic signals were improperly classified as scrap. Murmurs spread through the audience. She continued. The city spent millions preparing to replace equipment that should never have been discarded. Then she looked directly at Richard Cain. Councilman Cain, your resignation has been accepted. The room fell silent. Cain stood slowly. For the first time in his career, he had nothing to say. As he walked toward the exit, he paused beside Elijah. Without looking at him, he quietly said, I underestimated you. Elijah answered without anger. No. You underestimated what people can do when they're given a chance. Cain lowered his head. Then he walked away. 6 months later, the old repair yard looked completely different. The rusted fence was gone. In its place stood a modern training center. A new sign read, Brooks Community Electrical Academy. Inside, young apprentices learned electrical work using the very traffic lights once thrown away as junk. Some graduates had already started businesses. Others worked for the city. Several taught classes themselves. Maya walked through the workshop carrying a small glass display case. Inside rested her grandfather's old yellow voltage tester. She placed it in the entrance lobby. Beneath it sat a small brass plaque. Nothing is worthless until someone understands its value. Elijah stood quietly beside her. You think Grandpa would have liked this? He smiled. I think. He'd tell us there's still more work to do. Maya laughed. Probably. Outside, children rode bicycles safely through intersections protected by the very lights people once mocked. The city hadn't just bought back broken traffic lights. It had bought back something far more valuable. Its integrity, its trust, and its future. Sometimes, the greatest opportunities don't arrive wrapped in gold. Sometimes, they're dumped in your yard, and everyone else calls them garbage. If this story reminded you that today's rejection can become tomorrow's greatest opportunity, share it with someone who needs that reminder. And subscribe for more stories where hard work, integrity, and perseverance always find their reward. End of story.